sentenced to a jail term. And then there was the case of Richard Buell, who, to the best of my knowledge, isn't even a Unitarian Universalist minister. So that's a nice positive honk there. So anyhow, getting back to Richard Buell, the interesting thing about Richard Buell is, to the best of my knowledge, he was not a Unitarian Universalist minister, but he was the only Unitarian Universalist rapist who I specifically described as a pedophile rapist, because his victims were all preteen girls. According to the news reports about the trial and conviction of Richard Buell for rape, his victims were no older than 12 years old at the times that the rapes took place, and by some estimates could have been as young as 6 years old, but certainly somewhere between 9 and 12. That was very clear. So it doesn't matter, how much younger necessarily they would have been, but there's no question that they were somewhere between 9 and 12 years old when the rapes took place. So definitely someone who can be properly described as a pedophile rapist. So that's Unitarian Universalist perversion of justice, seeking to cover up and hide the fact that the Unitarian Universalist religious community has some rather despicable and, dare I say, vicious perverts in its church. That's that really, perversion of justice to cover up and deny perversion of Unitarian Universalist ministers and Unitarian Universalist lay people, and indeed Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers. Because the fact of the matter is, although I'd only blogged about 2 cases of pedophilia and rape, I did know of other cases. There are other cases I could have blogged about, but hadn't up to that point. And the thing with a cease and desist demand letter is that it not only usually tells you to, retract or erase or get rid of statements you've already made, but it also essentially tries to intimidate you into not making any further similar type statements. So in falsely accusing me of blasphemous libel to conceal pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalists, the Unitarian Universalist Association was also trying to prevent me from, making any further statements about other pedophiles and rapists within the church. For instance, and I will say that this is a case that I did not know about at the time. I found out later. But for instance, there's a Sunday school teacher in, I believe, it was Oregon or Washington State. I'm trying to remember. Portland, Oregon. So I'm pretty sure it was Oregon. Might have been Washington State. Guy by the name of Stephen Craig Bullite. That's Stephen with a V, if I'm not mistaken. Craig, C-R-A-I-G. Bullite is spelled B-U-L-L-E-I-T. He was a religious educator in a Unitarian Universalist church in, I believe, Oregon. In fact, I think I do know the name of the specific church. I just don't have it memorized and available at the tip of my fingers in the memory banks, as it were. What happened with Stephen Craig Bullite is one day he sent his computer out for repair, and the computer repair people found that he had a lot of child pornography images on his computer hard drive, and so they notified the police, and the police did an investigation, and it was discovered that the child pornography on Stephen Craig Bullite's computer was produced by himself. So it wasn't child pornography that he'd found.
Say hi.
What's that?
I don't say hi.
You don't say what?
Hello.
You don't say what?
I don't say hello.
Oh, okay. Don't say hello.
I don't mean to it's really quite a scene out here.
Yeah.
I wish you could, good people make mistakes too, maybe,
Right. So maybe good people should correct mistakes when they make them, don't you think?
Well, I don't, I've been coming here forever.
Yeah.
And I'm just surprised that they persecuted you that much around.
Right.
It doesn't seem believable.
Well, maybe you should, do some fact checking, because maybe if you did some fact checking, you'd discover that it was believable. You're living in denial. When you say I can't believe, what you're saying is I don't want to believe.
I'm sure you're well here. I am.
I'm sure you are. Nazis were treated well by Nazis, in case you forgot about that. Corrupt people treat other corrupt people nicely. Now, I'm not saying you're corrupt, but I'm just saying that, evil people are treated nicely by other evil people. Even nice people are treated nicely by evil people. So this guy, in fact, has been coming to church for years. And, he said, I don't say that, right after I mentioned child pornography. So I presume he was objecting to my speaking about child pornography in front of the church. And then he said, I don't say hello. Well, we got in a little discussion. And again, it just illustrates the willful ignorance and psychological denial that's so common with not just Montreal Unitarian, but also, Unitarian Universalists much more generally. And of course it expands beyond that to the public, but I've never seen the incredible willful ignorance and psychological denial that not only Montreal Unitarians, but many, in fact the vast majority of Unitarian Universalists I've communicated with display, when you bring up the subject of clergy sexual misconduct, specifically, pedophilia and rape within the church. They just don't want to know. They just don't want to deal with it. They just want to pretend it, it doesn't happen kind of thing, and that the UUA would never try to cover this kind of stuff up and so on. So just total psychological denial, extremely high levels of willful ignorance, and this guy basically illustrated it, It's like, oh, I can't believe, it's just, well, maybe you should do some fact checking, buddy. Instead of wallowing in psychological denial and willful ignorance, maybe you should check what the actual facts are, and you'll discover that, oh, well, gee, in fact, the Unitarian Church of Montreal did, in fact, do some very foolish and corrupt and evil things to me personally, but also other people. And then we can broaden out to the Unitarian Universalist Association, which also did some very foolish and corrupt things, and quite literally evil, certainly immoral and unethical. There's no question whatsoever that both the Unitarian Church of Montreal as an institution and the Unitarian Universalist Association as an institution have done things that the vast majority of Canadians and Americans, to say nothing of world citizens, would quickly agree are unethical and immoral, and also abusive in various ways and corrupt in various ways. But that word evil, I'm not saying it's the worst evil in the world, but it's evil. It's definitely evil. Some of the things that Montreal Unitarians have done and other Unitarian Universalists have done and UUA leaders have done, and so on. There's actual evil behavior, and like this guy says, good people make mistakes. Well, it's one thing to make a mistake; it's another thing to obstinately refuse to correct that mistake. It's another thing to obstinately refuse to acknowledge that mistake, and so on. And this is where the problem lies, is in addition to doing things that are immoral and unethical and corrupt and abusive and yes, evil, Montreal Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists more generally, including top level UUA leaders and many Unitarian Universalist ministers having made a so-called mistake. Because, mistake's a pretty soft word to use for some of the stuff. Is it a mistake to invite teenage Tibetan refugees to America and then proceed to repeatedly rape them over a period measured in years? I guess you could call that a mistake, but I think there's other more appropriate words to describe it, such as evil. But anyway, getting back to what this guy said about good people making mistakes. Well, fine, you made a mistake. Then, once that mistake is being confronted, once someone said, hey, you made a mistake, and I expect you to correct that mistake. And I also expect you to apologize for that mistake. Because actually that mistake, was more than just a little mistake. It was immoral, unethical, borderline criminal, actually criminal, thoroughly corrupt, and yes, evil. So I expect you to do everything that's necessary to correct that mistake as much as you possibly can, and to apologize for making that mistake. And maybe ensure that some people face some real accountability for making that so-called mistake. But, this is where Montreal Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists more generally fall down. Generally are simply incapable of holding their clergy and their leaders accountable for their mistakes, some of which are in fact unethical, immoral, corrupt, abusive, evil. So on that note, I think we're more or less wrapping up the first half hour of protest here on December 11th, 2016. Yeah, just a few seconds left on the record function here before it automatically shuts off. So it happens to be the day after Human Rights Day, so I'll probably talk about human rights for a bit. But not a bad little first half hour of protesting.